The billionaire CEO flew to propose in Paris. She landed in London with a court date and a baby's passport. The waiting room at the London family court was sterile and quiet. Isla Rowan sat in a hard plastic chair, her daughter Aurora sleeping against her shoulder, the baby's tiny hand clutching the fabric of her mother's coat. In her lap sat a folder. Inside that folder was a court summon, a paternity determination request, and a passport application that couldn't be processed without it. She'd spent 2 years building a life without him, 2 years proving she didn't need Archer Hayes. And now the law required her to face the man who'd disappeared from her world without explanation. The door opened. Isla looked up, and there he was, Archer Hayes, tech billionaire, the man who'd once held her like she was the only steady thing in his chaotic world, the man who'd vanished without a word. He stood frozen in the doorway, expensive suit slightly rumpled from travel, eyes fixed not on Isla but on the baby in her arms. The baby with his eyes, his dark hair, his exact way of tilting her head when she slept. Recognition crashed over his face like a wave. His chest stopped moving. His hands trembled. And Isla watched him realize in real time that he was a father, that she'd been raising his child alone, that he'd missed everything. Isla, he whispered, his voice breaking on her name. If you're already hooked by this story, if you need to know what happens next, do us a favor right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you real stories about love, accountability, and what happens when timing changes everything. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now let's go back to where it all began. For 2 years, Isla Rowan had lived inside a silence she never asked for. A silence made of unanswered calls, unfinished memories, a birth certificate with only one parent named, and a love she'd tried desperately to forget. Her flat in London was small but warm, filled with children's books and soft blankets, and the organized chaos of single motherhood. She'd created a life, a good life, one built on careful routines and fierce independence. Wake at 6. Feed Aurora. Dress her in whatever clean clothes were available. Drop her at the childminder, who lived 2 floors down. Work from her laptop until 3. Pick up Aurora. Play. Dinner. Bath. Stories. Sleep. Repeat. It was exhausting. Financially precarious. Sometimes lonely. But it was hers. Built entirely by her hands and her will and her refusal to need anyone else. Aurora was 18 months old now. A tiny miracle with Archer's intelligent eyes and Isla's gentle smile. She babbled constantly. Loved books and music boxes and the way sunlight caught dust particles in the air. She was everything beautiful that had come from something broken. Isla would watch her daughter sleep and feel this overwhelming mix of love and regret. Love for this perfect child. Regret that Aurora would grow up without knowing her father. That Isla's pride and fear had created a situation where a brilliant, kind, curious little girl would have to explain why only one parent's name appeared on her documents. But what choice had she had? Archer had walked away, had chosen his empire over their relationship, had made it abundantly clear through his silence that Isla wasn't a priority. So she'd made a choice too. To protect herself. To protect her daughter. To build a life that didn't depend on a man who'd already proven he wouldn't stay. She worked as a freelance digital art curator. Before Aurora, she'd worked for galleries and museums. Had traveled for exhibitions. Had built a reputation for understanding emerging artists and digital installations. The work was creative and fulfilling, but also demanding. After Aurora's birth, she'd transitioned to remote consulting. It paid less, offered no benefits, but gave her flexibility. She could work while Aurora napped, could take calls during quiet moments, could be present in ways traditional employment wouldn't allow. Money was tight, always tight. She shopped at discount stores and accepted hand-me-down clothes from the other moms at the community center. She cooked simple meals and skipped luxuries and counted pennies with the precision of someone who understood that one financial emergency could destroy everything she'd built. But they were okay. Not comfortable, not secure, but surviving, managing, getting by. Before all this, before Aurora and single motherhood and financial stress, there had been Archer Hayes. The man who'd swept into her life like a storm and left just as suddenly. They'd met 2.5 years ago at a digital arts conference in New York. Isla had been there representing a small London gallery, curating an exhibition on technology and human connection. Archer had been the keynote speaker. Tech billionaire at 34. Founder of a platform that connected investors with innovative startups. The media called him a visionary. Colleagues called him ruthless. But when Islam met him, she saw something different. Something vulnerable beneath the armor of success. Their connection had been unexpected. Isla wasn't impressed by wealth or status. She cared about art and meaning and whether people were genuine. After Archer's speech, they'd ended up at the same reception. He'd approached her display, studying the digital installations with real interest. Not the performative interest wealthy people often showed at art events. Actual curiosity. He'd asked intelligent questions about the intersection of technology and emotion. About whether digital art could capture vulnerability the way traditional mediums did. About the artists she'd chosen and why their work mattered. They'd talked for 3 hours, long after the reception ended, standing in an empty gallery space with security waiting to lock up. Just talking about art and innovation and the loneliness of building things nobody understood. About the cost of success and the fear of irrelevance and the strange isolation that came with being good at what you do but disconnected from why it mattered. Archer had said something that night that stayed with Isla. I've built this massive platform, connected thousands of people, facilitated billions in investment, and I've never felt more alone. Like I'm surrounded by connections, but have none that are real. Isla had understood completely. Her world was different, but the feeling was the same. Surrounded by art and beauty and meaning, but somehow untethered. They'd exchanged numbers. Started talking. Text messages that turned into phone calls that turned into video chats that turned into Archer flying to London between meetings just to take her to dinner. For 6 months, they'd built something fragile but real. Soft. Tender. Mutual. Beautiful. Archer was different with her than he was with the world. The ruthless businessman disappeared. He became thoughtful. Present. He'd show up at her flat with takeout and ask about her day and actually listen to the answers. He'd send her articles about artists he thought she'd appreciate. He'd call from airports and hotel rooms, exhausted from travel, just to hear her voice before sleeping. He told her things he'd never told anyone. About the pressure of maintaining his company's growth. About investors who treated him like a performing asset rather than a person. About the loneliness of success achieved by sacrificing everything else. And Isla shared her own vulnerabilities. Her fear that her work didn't matter. Her imposter syndrome in a field dominated by people from wealthy backgrounds. Her worry that she'd never build anything stable. They understood each other. Saw past the public presentations to the humans underneath. For 6 months, Isla felt safe. Loved. Chosen. She started imagining a future. Started believing that maybe love didn't have to be complicated. That maybe she'd found someone who valued her the way she valued him. Then came the project that changed everything. A massive acquisition deal. International. Complex. High stakes. Archer's investors had identified a European tech company that perfectly aligned with their expansion strategy. But the deal required Archer's complete attention. Constant travel. Strategy meetings. Negotiations that stretched late into the night. He'd warned Isla it would be intense, but temporary. A few months of chaos. Then they'd get back to normal. He'd promised to stay connected. Promised to call. Promised that this wouldn't change them. Isla had believed him. Had understood that his work demanded focus. She'd supported him. Told him to do what he needed to do. Assured him she'd be fine. And for the first few weeks, he'd kept his promise. Daily calls. Text messages. Updates about where he was and what he was dealing with. But slowly, the communication shifted. Calls became shorter. Less frequent. Text messages more sporadic. His responses more distracted. Isla told herself it was temporary. That he was overwhelmed. That once the deal closed, everything would go back to how it was. But the deal kept extending. More complications. More negotiations. More demands on Archer's time. And his presence in Isla's life faded proportionally. Calls stopped altogether. Messages went unanswered. The man who'd once made her feel like the center of his world had made her invisible. Isla tried reaching out. Sent supportive messages. Asked if he was okay. Offered to fly to wherever he was just to see him for a day. Nothing. Radio silence. She told herself there had to be an explanation. That something terrible must have happened. That Archer wouldn't just abandon her without reason. But weeks became months. And the silence became answer enough. He'd moved on. Whatever they'd had, Whatever she'd thought they were building had been disposable, easily abandoned when something more important demanded his attention. The realization broke something in Isla, not just her heart, her trust, her belief that she could read people, that she could tell when someone genuinely cared. She stopped reaching out, stopped checking her phone constantly, stopped imagining explanations that would make his disappearance acceptable. She just accepted it. Archer Hayes had been a beautiful chapter that ended badly, and she needed to move forward. So she focused on work, took on extra projects, stayed busy, tried not to think about the man who'd made her believe in love and then taught her it was conditional, tried not to replay their last conversation, searching for signs she'd missed, tried not to wonder what she'd done wrong, because surely she must have done something. Surely there was a reason he'd found it so easy to walk away. She carried that question like a weight. What had she lacked? What had made her so easy to forget? It was 6 weeks after Archer's disappearance that Isla realized her period was late. She told herself it was stress. Irregular cycles happened. But the nausea started. The exhaustion. The way her body felt different in ways she couldn't quite name. She bought a pregnancy test at a pharmacy 2 miles from her flat, somewhere none of her neighbors shopped. She took it home, sat on her bathroom floor, watched 2 pink lines appear, and felt the world tilt. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Archer Hayes' child, the man who'd ghosted her, who'd made it clear through his absence that she didn't matter. She sat there for an hour, trying to process, trying to figure out what to do. She could reach out, tell him. He deserved to know, didn't he? But another voice, louder and more insistent, reminded her how he'd treated her, how easily he'd walked away, how clearly he'd demonstrated that she wasn't a priority. Did she really want to tie herself to someone who'd shown such disregard? Did she want to spend the next 18 years dealing with a man who'd already proven he couldn't be counted on? She thought about it for days, picked up her phone a dozen times, started messages she never sent, rehearsed conversations in her head. But every time she got close to reaching out, she remembered the silence, the unanswered calls, the way he'd just disappeared without explanation, and pride mixed with fear in a way that made reaching out feel impossible. What if he didn't care? What if he accused her of trying to trap him? What if he suggested she handle it alone? The rejection would destroy her. So she made a choice born from hurt and pride and the desire to protect herself from further abandonment. She would handle this alone, would raise this child without Archer's help or involvement, would prove to herself that she didn't need him. It felt empowering in the moment, like taking control, like refusing to be a victim. But underneath the empowerment was grief. Grief for the future she'd imagined. Grief for the father her child would never know. Grief for the love that had felt real but hadn't been strong enough to survive distance and distraction. The pregnancy was difficult. Isla was sick constantly, exhausted in ways that made working nearly impossible. She'd saved some money, but not enough. Not nearly enough. She cut expenses ruthlessly, stopped eating out, canceled subscriptions, shopped only for absolute necessities, told her clients she was reducing her workload for health reasons. The other moms at her prenatal classes talked about their partners, about nursery preparations and baby showers, and the support they had. Isla smiled and nodded, and said her situation was complicated. She didn't lie, didn't invent a partner who didn't exist. Just stayed vague enough that people stopped asking. The isolation was crushing. She'd moved to London for work, didn't have family nearby, had friends, but not the kind who'd be there at 3 a.m. when she was scared and alone and wondering how she'd manage this. She attended every appointment alone, made every decision alone, assembled furniture alone, prepared for motherhood with a determination that masked absolute terror. Aurora was born on a cold morning in March. Labor was long and painful and lonely. Isla had a midwife, but no hand to hold. No one to tell her she was doing great. No one to share the moment when her daughter finally arrived. But when they placed Aurora on her chest, tiny and perfect, and crying with impressive lung capacity, Isla felt something shift. This was hers. This perfect, beautiful child was completely hers. Not in a possessive way. In a protective way. She would give this baby everything. Every ounce of love and attention and security. Would create a childhood where Aurora never felt unwanted or abandoned. Where she knew without question that she was loved. Isla whispered promises into her daughter's tiny ear. Promises about safety and love and always showing up. Promises that sounded a lot like the ones Archer had broken. The first year was survival. Pure survival. Isla had never been so exhausted. Aurora was colicky. Cried for hours. Slept in short bursts that never aligned with Isla's needs. Isla walked the flat at 3 a.m., bouncing and shushing and crying herself sometimes. She learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. Learned to work with one hand while holding a baby with the other. Learned that motherhood was harder than anyone had properly explained, but also more beautiful. Aurora's first smile. Her first laugh. The way she'd light up when Isla came into view. The fierce love that made everything worth it. Isla took photos constantly. Documented every milestone. First time holding her head up. First time rolling over. First solid foods. First steps. Created a record of Aurora's life even though no one else was asking for it. Even though Archer would never see these moments. Even though she was recording for an audience of one. Money was a constant stress. Childcare was expensive. Formula and diapers and clothes Aurora outgrew every few weeks added up faster than Isla's freelance income could cover. She applied for benefits. Accepted help from the community center. Shopped at charity shops. Made it work through careful budgeting and constant sacrifice. She wore the same rotation of clothes. Skipped meals to make sure Aurora had everything she needed. Turned down social invitations because she couldn't afford babysitters. Built a life that was small and careful and entirely focused on her daughter. She didn't resent it. Didn't feel martyred. This was just what needed to be done. But sometimes, late at night, she'd look at Aurora sleeping peacefully and feel anger rise. Anger at Archer. At his absence. At the fact that he was somewhere living his life completely unaware that he'd created this beautiful child. That Isla was sacrificing everything while he sacrificed nothing. That the burden of their mutual choices fell entirely on her shoulders. She'd see him occasionally in the news. Tech billionaire closes major deal. Archer Hayes speaks at Innovation Summit. His company valued at billions. He looked successful. Happy. Completely unburdened by the life Isla was living. And she'd wonder if he ever thought about her. If he remembered those 6 months they'd spent building something. If he felt any guilt about how it ended. Probably not. Men like Archer didn't look back. They moved forward. Built empires. Collected achievements. Forgot the women they'd left behind. The thought made Isla determined to never contact him. To never give him the satisfaction of knowing she'd needed anything from him. She'd raise Aurora alone. Prove that single mothers were strong and capable and didn't need men who couldn't be bothered to stay. But life has a way of forcing confrontation with the boundaries we draw. Aurora was 15 months old when Isla got the opportunity. A museum in Singapore wanted to hire her for a 6-month digital art consultation. The pay was extraordinary. 3 times what she made freelancing. Enough to build actual savings. To create financial security. To stop living paycheck to paycheck. It was exactly what she needed. The position started in 4 months. They'd handle her work visa. Provide housing. Even cover Aurora's childcare. It was perfect. Too perfect. Isla accepted immediately. Started planning the logistics. Notified her landlord. Began the visa application process. Everything was falling into place. Until she hit the requirement for Aurora's travel documents. The passport application required both parents' signatures. Or legal documentation granting one parent sole authority. Isla had neither. Archer's name wasn't on Aurora's birth certificate. Isla had left it blank. Hadn't wanted any legal connection to the man who'd abandoned her. But now that omission created complications. The consulate was sympathetic but firm. UK law required specific documentation for minor children traveling internationally. Without Archer's signature or a court order establishing Isla's sole parental authority, Aurora couldn't get a passport. Without a passport, she couldn't travel to Singapore. Without traveling to Singapore, Isla would lose the job opportunity. The job that would change their lives. The bureaucrat who explained this looked genuinely sorry. It's just procedure. Standard requirements. You'll need to either get the father's signature or file a court petition establishing your legal authority as sole guardian. Once that's processed, we can issue the passport. They made it sound simple. Routine. But it wasn't. It required Isla to do the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do. Contact Archer. Acknowledge his existence. Ask him for something. The thought made her physically ill. She tried everything else first. Consulted with a family solicitor who explained that yes, she could file for a declaration of sole parental responsibility. But the court would require her to demonstrate that she'd attempted to locate and notify Aurora's father, that she'd made good faith efforts to include him in the process, that she couldn't just pretend he didn't exist. The law wanted children to have two parents when possible, wanted fathers involved unless there were compelling reasons to exclude them. And Islah's reason, that he'd ghosted her and she was hurt and angry, wasn't legally compelling. The solicitor explained it clinically, dispassionately, but Islah heard the judgment underneath. You chose to have this baby alone. You chose not to tell him. Now you have to deal with the consequences of that choice. It wasn't fair, but it was reality. Islah spent weeks in internal war. She'd built her life around not needing Archer Hayes, around proving she could do this alone. And now she was being forced to acknowledge that legally, parenthood wasn't just about who showed up. It was about biology and rights and documentation. Aurora had a father, whether Islah liked it or not, whether he deserved the title or not. And that father had legal standing, had rights the law would protect, even if he'd never exercised them, even if he didn't know Aurora existed. The injustice of it consumed her. But so did the practical reality. She needed that job, needed the financial security, needed to do what was best for Aurora even if it meant swallowing her pride. She filed the paperwork, did it through a solicitor to keep some distance, keep some dignity. The petition was simple, clinical, just facts. Islah Rowan requests determination of sole parental responsibility for minor child Aurora Rowan. Father Archer Hayes to be notified of proceedings. Listed his company's registered address because she didn't have anything more current. Provided the dates of their relationship, the approximate conception date, the birth certificate showing Aurora's birth. Requested that the court grant her sole authority to make decisions regarding Aurora's passport and travel. It was all very professional, very impersonal, just legal process, not personal drama. The solicitor assured her it was routine, that these cases happen constantly, that Archer would likely just sign whatever needed signing to make it go away. Men who weren't involved in their children's lives usually didn't fight these determinations, didn't want the responsibility. The solicitor filed everything, set a court date 6 weeks out, sent the required notifications, and Islah waited, terrified that Archer would ignore it. Terrified that he wouldn't. What Islah didn't know was that Archer Hayes was having his own reckoning. That after 2 years of silence and success that felt increasingly empty, he'd been thinking about her, missing her in ways that surprised him. The acquisition that had consumed his life 2 years ago had closed successfully, had made him wealthier, more influential, more successful by every traditional measure, but also more miserable. The celebration had felt hollow, the congratulations meaningless. He'd stood at the closing dinner surrounded by investors and executives and realized he had no one to share the victory with, no one who cared about him rather than his net worth. He thought about Islah constantly, about the 6 months they'd spent together, about how she'd made him feel human, about the way she'd looked at him like he mattered beyond his achievements. He'd tried to move on, dated other women, beautiful women, successful women, women who checked every box, but none of them felt right. None of them saw him the way Islah had. None of them made him want to be better. He'd ghosted her because he'd been overwhelmed, because the acquisition had demanded everything and he'd convinced himself personal relationships could wait, that Islah would understand, that she'd still be there when things calmed down. He'd been wrong, catastrophically wrong. By the time he'd tried to reach out, 6 months after their last contact, her number was disconnected. Her email bounced. She'd disappeared as thoroughly as he had. He'd felt panic then, real panic. Had tried to find her through mutual contacts, but no one knew where she'd gone. She'd vanished. And Archer realized he'd lost something irreplaceable. He thought about her for months, wondered where she was, whether she was happy, whether she hated him, whether there was any possibility of explaining, of apologizing, of trying again. The thought became obsession. He hired a private investigator, found out she was living in London, working freelance. The investigator offered to get more details, but Archer stopped him. This felt invasive. Wrong. If he wanted to talk to Islah, he should do it directly. Should show up and face whatever anger or indifference she felt. Should be brave enough to risk rejection. So he planned. Not a casual reach out. Something bigger. Something that matched the magnitude of what he'd lost. He'd fly to Paris. Book the restaurant where they'd had their first proper date. Ask her to meet him there. And if she came, if she gave him that chance, he'd apologize. Explain. Ask for another chance. And if she said yes, if she still felt anything, he'd propose. Right there. Prove that he understood what mattered. That he was ready to prioritize her. That he'd learned from his catastrophic mistake. It was dramatic. Romantic. The kind of gesture that either worked or became a story about delusional men who thought love could be won through grand actions. But Archer didn't care. He'd lost Isla once through passivity. Through choosing work over relationship. Through assuming she'd wait. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He bought a ring. A simple band with a small diamond. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing that screamed wealth. Something that said, I remember what you value. He booked the flight. Reserved the restaurant. Wrote and rewrote what he'd say. Rehearsed the apology and the explanation and the promise that he'd be different this time. Better. Present. He felt like a teenager preparing for prom. Nervous and excited and terrified of rejection. But also certain. This was right. This was what he should have done 2 years ago. And even if Isla said no, even if she'd moved on, he needed her to know. Needed to tell her that she'd mattered. That walking away was the worst decision he'd ever made. That he'd spent 2 years realizing that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. The flight to Paris was surreal. Archer sat in first class, surrounded by business travelers, and felt completely disconnected from his usual world. He wasn't flying to close a deal or attend a meeting. He was flying for love. For a woman who might slam a door in his face. For a chance at fixing the biggest mistake of his life. He landed at Charles de Gaulle. Checked into a hotel. Changed into a nice suit. Confirmed the restaurant reservation. Then sent the message he'd been composing for weeks. Simple. Direct. Hopeful. I'm here. In Paris. At the restaurant where we had our first proper date. I know I don't deserve your time. But I'm asking for it anyway. Please come. I have so much I need to say. He hit send. Stared at his phone. Waited for the read receipt. For the typing indicator. For any sign that Isla had seen it. For something that would tell him whether this grand gesture was romantic or pathetic. The response came 30 minutes later. Not what he expected. Not anger or refusal, or even acknowledgement of his apology. Just 8 words that made his blood run cold. I'm in London, and we have a court date. Archer read it 3 times. Tried to understand. Court date? What court date? Why would they have a court date? They hadn't been in contact for 2 years. What possible legal issue could exist between them? He tried calling. The number wouldn't connect. He sent follow-up messages. What are you talking about? What court date? Please call me. I'm confused. Nothing. No response. Just those 8 words hanging in the air like a bomb that had detonated without him understanding the explosion. He sat in his Paris hotel room, ring in his pocket, proposal speech memorized, and felt reality shift. Something was wrong. Something he didn't understand. Something that required him to be in London, not Paris. He booked the first available flight. Canceled the restaurant. Threw his things in his bag. Barely made it through security and onto the plane before it departed. The flight to London was 90 minutes that felt like days. What court date? Why hadn't she told him before now? What had he missed? His mind raced through possibilities. None of them made sense. They hadn't had financial entanglements. Hadn't shared property. Hadn't been together long enough to create legal complications. Unless something else had happened. Something he'd been completely unaware of. The thought made him nauseous. He tried to think back. To their last contact. To whether there'd been any indication. Anything he'd missed. But he'd been so consumed by work. So distracted. So convinced that relationships could be paused and resumed when convenient. What if something had happened and he'd been too absent to notice? What if Isla had needed him and he'd been unreachable? The plane landed at Heathrow. Archer turned his phone off airplane mode. Immediately sent another message. I just landed in London. Please tell me what's happening. Where do I need to be? This time the response came quickly. An address. A time. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Family court. Nothing else. No explanation. No context. Just the cold hard facts of where to show up. Archer's hands shook as he read it. Family court. Not civil court. Not criminal. Family. The word repeated in his head. What issue between them would involve family court? They weren't married. Hadn't been engaged. Hadn't even been together that long. What could possibly require family court intervention? But he knew. Somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place that processes information before conscious thought catches up, he knew. And the knowing terrified him. Made him want to get back on a plane. Made him want to run. But he'd run once before. had chosen avoidance over confrontation, and it had cost him everything. He wouldn't do it again. Whatever awaited him at that court, whatever truth Isla had been carrying alone, he would face it, would finally show up, even if he was 2 years too late. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, if you're wondering how it's possible for two people to be this close and this far apart at the same time, we need you to comment below. What would you do in Archer's position? What would you do in Isla's? Tell us your thoughts right now. Your perspective matters to us. Let's continue. Archer didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. He checked into a hotel near the court, paced his room, tried to prepare for possibilities his mind couldn't fully process. Family court meant children, meant parental rights and responsibilities, meant Isla had a child, or was trying to adopt, or had some family issue that required legal intervention, and she'd listed him as involved somehow. But how? They hadn't spoken in 2 years. What connection could exist that he didn't know about? The math started forming in his head. Unwanted. Unstoppable. 2 years since their last contact. If Isla had been pregnant when he disappeared, if she'd discovered it after he'd stopped responding, if she'd decided not to tell him, the timeline worked. Horribly, perfectly worked. His chest tightened. He couldn't breathe properly. This couldn't be real. Couldn't be what was happening. But his phone showed the message. The address. Family court. And Isla's silence communicated more than any explanation. Morning came slowly. Archer dressed in the suit he'd worn for the Paris proposal. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd worn this to fix a relationship, to start something new. Now he was wearing it to face consequences he hadn't known existed. He arrived at the court 30 minutes early. The building was institutional, gray, built for function rather than comfort. People moved through the halls with the exhausted expressions of those navigating life's hardest moments. Divorces, custody battles, child protection cases. Family court was where love went to be legally dissected. And then the door opened. And there she was, Isla Rowan, 2 years older, more tired, more guarded, but still beautiful in the way that had first captivated him. She wore simple clothes, carried a large bag, held something against her shoulder. Someone, a baby. Archer's brain stopped processing. Time slowed. He stood without meaning to. Isla saw him. Her expression didn't change. No surprise. No anger. Just weary resignation. She walked closer. The baby shifted, turned her head, and Archer saw eyes. His eyes. Dark hair. His hair. The exact way he tilted his head when thinking. This wasn't speculation. Wasn't possibility. This was certainty. Genetic recognition that bypassed rational thought. He was looking at his daughter. His child. A tiny human who existed because of choices he'd made and consequences he'd never considered. His legs felt weak. His vision blurred. His entire understanding of reality rearranged itself around this truth. Isla. He whispered, unable to form full sentences. She stopped a few feet away, adjusted the baby, met his eyes with devastating calm. Her name is Aurora. She's 18 months old. And yes, she's yours. The words landed like physical blows. Archer opened his mouth, closed it, couldn't find language adequate for this moment. I didn't know, he finally managed. Why didn't you tell me? You disappeared, Isla said simply. Stopped answering calls. Stopped responding to messages. Made it very clear I didn't matter. So I chose not to trap someone who'd already walked away. I would have come back, Archer insisted. If I'd known, I would have been there. Would you? Isla challenged. Or would you have seen a baby as another distraction from building your empire? Another obligation interfering with your priorities? Archer flinched. Because he didn't know. Didn't know who he would have been 2 years ago. Whether he would have chosen responsibility or convenience. Whether he would have shown up or found excuses. But he knew who he wanted to be now. Can I hold her? He asked quietly. Isla hesitated, then slowly shifted Aurora toward him. Support her head. She's heavier than she looks. Archer took his daughter with trembling hands. She was solid, real, looking up at him with curious eyes that were absolutely his own. She reached for his face with tiny fingers, touched his cheek, made a babbling sound that might have been a word. Archer felt something break open in his chest. Something he'd kept carefully guarded his entire adult life. This was his child. His daughter. A person who existed because of him. Who carried his genetics and deserved his presence and had been living without him for 18 months. The loss of that time hit him like grief. First smiles he'd never seen. First words he'd never heard. First steps he hadn't witnessed. A year and a half of moments he could never get back. Stolen by his own absence. By his inability to balance ambition with human connection. By his assumption that relationships could be paused and resumed at convenience. "I'm sorry," he said to Isla, tears running down his face now. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For disappearing. For not being there. For missing this. For making you do everything alone. I was wrong. About everything. And I want to fix it. Want to be involved. Want to be her father. If you'll let me." Isla's expression softened slightly. "That's why we're here. I need to get her a passport. We have a job opportunity in Singapore. But the passport requires your signature or a court order giving me sole authority. I wasn't trying to trap you. Wasn't trying to force you into anything. I just need legal clarity so we can move forward with our lives." "Singapore," Archer repeated, the words sinking in. "You're leaving the country." "For 6 months," Isla confirmed. "A museum consultation. The pay is good. Really good. Enough to build actual savings. To stop living paycheck to paycheck. This opportunity changes everything for us. Take me with you," Archer said suddenly. Isla blinked. "What? I mean, not literally. But don't shut me out. I want to be part of her life. Part of both your lives. I'll sign whatever you need for the passport. I'll support the move. But please don't disappear with my daughter to the other side of the world without letting me be involved. You can't just show up after 18 months and demand involvement," Isla said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "You don't know her. Don't know her routines, or her temperament, or what makes her laugh. You're genetically her father, but you're a stranger to her. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm being realistic." "Then let me learn," Archer pressed. "Let me get to know her. I'll do whatever it takes. Move to Singapore if I need to. Restructure my work. Change my priorities. I've spent 2 years realizing I built a life that means nothing because I have no one to share it with. Please don't make me spend the rest of my life regretting that I missed knowing my daughter." A court official called their case. They walked into the courtroom together. Sat on opposite sides with a solicitor next to Isla. The judge reviewed the petition. Asked Archer if he was indeed Aurora's father. He confirmed. Asked if he'd been aware of the pregnancy. He said no. The judge looked between them with the tired expression of someone who'd seen every variation of family drama. "Ms. Rowan is requesting sole parental responsibility to facilitate passport issuance. Mr. Hayes, do you contest this petition?" Archer looked at Isla. At Aurora in her arms. At the life he'd missed. "I don't contest it. But I want to be involved. Want visitation. Want to be part of my daughter's life. If that's possible." The judge nodded. "That's a separate matter requiring a different process. But both parents can consent to a temporary order establishing Ms. Rowan's authority for travel documents while you work out a parenting plan." She looked at Isla. "Is that acceptable?" Isla hesitated. Then nodded. "Yes." The judge made the order. Signed documents. Instructed them to return in 3 months to file a formal parenting agreement. Told them to work together in the child's best interest. Dismissed them with the efficiency of someone managing dozens of cases. And just like that, the legal piece was resolved. But the human piece, the actually figuring out how to co-parent a child with someone you hadn't spoken to in 2 years, that was just beginning. They stood in the courthouse hallway. People flowing around them. Aurora getting fussy. Isla bouncing her gently. Archer just watching. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Properly." "Not here. Somewhere we can actually discuss what happens next." "There's a cafe down the street," Isla said. "Aurora needs to eat anyway." They walked in silence. The cafe was quiet. Mid-morning lull between breakfast and lunch rushes. They sat at a corner table. Isla pulled out baby food and a spoon. Started feeding Aurora, who grabbed at the spoon with more enthusiasm than coordination. Archer watched the routine. The practiced efficiency. The way Isla anticipated Aurora's movements. The intimacy of mother and daughter. He'd missed all of this. The learning curve. The adjustment. The 1,000 small moments that built the relationship he was now trying to join 18 months late. "Tell me about her," Archer said. "Everything. What's she like? What does she love? I want to know." Isla fed Aurora another spoonful. "She's curious. Loves books. Will sit through the same story 10 times without getting bored. She likes music boxes. Any kind of repetitive sound calms her. She's social. Smiles at strangers. Doesn't have separation anxiety yet, but that's coming. She's starting to talk. Not real words yet, But she communicates, points at what she wants, gets frustrated when we don't understand. She's smart, Archer. Like scary smart. She figured out how to open the child-proof cabinet last week. She's going to be trouble. Archer smiled despite everything. She gets that from you. The intelligence. I just provide the stubborn gene. She has that too. Isla confirmed. When she decides she doesn't want something, good luck changing her mind. Last week she refused to wear shoes for 3 days. Just screamed every time I tried. Finally I gave up and let her go barefoot around the flat. She won that battle. What else? Archer asked, hungry for details. For the mundane pieces of Aurora's life. For everything he'd missed. She's an early riser. Up at 6 no matter what. Morning person just like you. She likes baths, but hates having her hair washed. She's not picky about food except she refuses anything green. Vegetables are apparently offensive. She naps once a day around 1. Sleeps through the night now, but that's new. For the first year, she woke up every few hours. I don't think I slept more than 3 consecutive hours for 12 months. You did that alone, Archer said quietly. All of it. The sleepless nights, and the learning curve, and the constant worry. I should have been there. Should have been your partner in this. You didn't know, Isla said, though her tone carried residual hurt. I chose not to tell you. That's on me too. I was angry and hurt, and convinced you didn't deserve to know. That I was protecting both of us by keeping you out. But I look at Aurora and wonder if I robbed her of something. If my pride cost her a father she should have had from the beginning. You did what you thought was right, Archer said. Based on how I treated you. Based on the silence I gave you. You made the choice that felt safest. I can't be angry about that when I created the situation that made you feel like you couldn't reach out. They sat quietly. Aurora finished eating. Isla wiped her face with a cloth. Aurora grabbed at it. Turned it into a game. Archer watched the interaction. Simple. Sweet. The kind of moment that would have seemed mundane 2 days ago, but now felt precious. This was his daughter. Playing with a washcloth. Completely unaware that her existence had just detonated her father's entire understanding of his life. What do you want? Isla asked directly. In terms of involvement. I need to understand what you're actually willing to commit to. Because Aurora deserves consistency. If you're going to be her father, you need to show up. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when you feel guilty. Actually show up. Can you do that? Yes, Archer said without hesitation. I know I have to prove it. That words don't mean anything after I've already failed. But I want to be her father. Want to be involved in every way you'll let me. I'll work out the logistics. We'll restructure my work. We'll move if I need to. Whatever it takes. You can't move to Singapore, Isla said practically. Your company is here. Your life is here. And I'm only going for 6 months. Then we'll be back. But I need to know you'll still be interested when the novelty wears off. When it's 3 a.m. feedings and dirty diapers, and the mundane, exhausting reality of parenting. Not just the cute moments and the pride of having produced a child. The actual work. I want all of it, Archer insisted. The cute and the mundane and the exhausting. I want to be someone Aurora knows. Someone she runs to. Someone who shows up. I missed her first year. I'm not missing anything else. Okay, Isla said slowly. Then here's what I propose. We have 3 months before Singapore. You use that time to build a relationship with Aurora. Come to the flat. Spend time with her. Learn her routines. Prove you can be consistent. If you show up, if you do the work, then we talk about video calls while I'm gone. About visits if you can travel. About building something sustainable long-term. What about us? Archer asked. Is there any possibility of us? Isla's expression closed. There is no us. There's co-parenting. There's figuring out how to raise a child together while living separate lives. But romance? No, you don't get that. You lost that when you disappeared without explanation. When you made me feel like I wasn't worth your time. I've built a life without you. Without needing you. And I'm not going back to the person who waited for calls that never came. The rejection stung. But Archer understood it. I don't blame you. I destroyed your trust. Proved I wasn't reliable. I'm not asking for another chance at us. I'm asking for a chance to be Aurora's father. Everything else is secondary. Good, Isla said. Because she's all that matters. Not my hurt feelings. Not your regrets. Just her well-being. If we can both focus on that, this might work. This is what accountability looks like. It's not grand gestures in Paris. It's showing up for the hard conversations. The difficult truths. The consequences of choices made long ago. If this story is reminding you that second chances require actual work, we need your help spreading that message. Subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us tell stories that matter. Now let's see what happens next. The next 3 months became a crash course in fatherhood for Archer Hayes. He showed up at Islah's flat 3 times a week. At first, Aurora cried when he arrived. Didn't recognize him. Clung to Islah. Archer sat on the floor and played with toys. Didn't force interaction. Let Aurora come to him on her terms. Slowly she warmed up. Started bringing him books to read. Started climbing into his lap during story time. Started recognizing his voice. Islah watched these interactions carefully. Noted when Archer was patient. When he followed her instructions about Aurora's routines. When he showed up tired from work, but showed up anyway. This was what she'd needed to see. Consistency. Effort. Proof that his promises weren't just guilt-driven impulses. Archer learned quickly. Learned which books Aurora loved and which ones she'd throw across the room. Learned that she needed warning before transitions. That you couldn't just pick her up and leave without preparing her. Learned her hunger cues and tired signals. Learned to change diapers without gagging, though that took practice. Learned that parenting was harder than any business challenge he'd ever faced. That Aurora didn't care about his achievements or his wealth. She just wanted presence. Attention. Someone who showed up and stayed. Archer started reorganizing his work. Took fewer meetings. Declined travel that wasn't essential. Told his team his priorities had shifted. Some colleagues understood. Others didn't. But Archer stopped caring. For the first time in his adult life, work wasn't the center of his universe. His daughter was. He and Islah developed a cautious co-parenting relationship. They weren't friends. Too much hurt between them. But they communicated effectively. Shared information about Aurora's development. Coordinated schedules. Had difficult conversations about money and support. Archer offered to cover everything. Insisted on it. Wanted to make up for the 18 months of expenses Islah had carried alone. Islah accepted some help, but not all. She didn't want to become financially dependent. Didn't want to owe him. They compromised. He'd cover Aurora's childcare and medical expenses. Would set up a savings account for her future. But Islah would maintain her independence. Would keep working. Would raise Aurora on her terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. A foundation they could build on. 6 weeks into this new arrangement, Archer was giving Aurora a bath while Islah made dinner. Aurora splashed happily. Archer got soaked. Didn't care. This was his daughter. Playing in bubbles. Completely trusting that he'd keep her safe. The responsibility of that trust was overwhelming. Beautiful. Terrifying. He lifted her out. Wrapped her in a towel. She snuggled against his chest. He carried her to her room. Islah had laid out pajamas. Archer dressed Aurora with the careful movements of someone still learning. Aurora babbled at him. He babbled back. Made her laugh. Islah appeared in the doorway. "You're getting good at this," she observed. "I'm trying," Archer said. "Still feel like I'm winging it most of the time." "That's parenting," Islah said with a slight smile. "No one actually knows what they're doing. We're all just trying our best and hoping we don't break them." "Have I mentioned I'm sorry?" Archer asked. "I know I say it constantly, but I need you to know I mean it. Every time." "I know," Islah said. "You're showing me. Through your actions. That matters more than words." She paused. Seemed to be deciding something. "I want to tell you something. About why I didn't tell you. About my thought process. Not as an excuse. Just as explanation." "I'm listening," Archer said, setting Aurora down to play with her toys. "When I found out I was pregnant," Islah began, "my first instinct was to call you. To tell you. To figure it out together. But I've been trying to reach you for weeks and getting nothing. You'd made it clear through your silence that I wasn't a priority. That you'd moved on. And I was hurt. Really hurt. So I convinced myself you didn't deserve to know. That I was protecting myself and the baby from someone who'd already proven they wouldn't show up. It felt empowering in the moment. Like taking control. But looking back, I wonder if I was just scared. Scared you'd reject us. Scared you'd suggest I handle it alone. Scared the rejection would destroy me. So I rejected you first. Made the choice before you could make it for me. I would have come back," Archer said quietly. "If I'd known. I was an idiot for ghosting you. For thinking work was more important than our relationship. But a baby? That would have snapped me out of my stupidity immediately." "Maybe," Islah said. "Or maybe you would have felt trapped. Resentful. Maybe you would have tried to be involved, but your heart wouldn't have been in it. I didn't want to risk Aurora growing up feeling like a burden, like she was the thing that ruined your life. I grew up with a father who stayed out of obligation, who made it clear constantly that he'd sacrificed his dreams for us. I didn't want that for her. Better no father than one who resented her existence. I don't resent her, Archer said firmly. I love her, more than I knew I could love anything. And yeah, finding out was a shock. But she's not a burden. She's a gift. The best thing I've ever been part of creating. Better than any company or deal or achievement. She's real. And she's mine. Ours. I'm grateful, Isla. Grateful you gave her life. Grateful you raised her into this amazing little person. Grateful you're giving me a chance to be her father even though I don't deserve it. Isla's eyes filled with tears. You're doing okay? For a dad who showed up 18 months late. You're actually doing okay. The Singapore departure date approached faster than either of them wanted. Isla's visa was approved. Her flights booked. The museum sent housing information and childcare contacts. Everything was arranged. Except the emotional logistics of separating Aurora from her father just as they'd built a relationship. Archer tried not to show how much it gutted him. Tried to be supportive. This job was important. Would secure Isla and Aurora's future. He couldn't ask her to give that up just because he'd finally decided to be present. But privately, the thought of 6 months without seeing his daughter destroyed him. He'd only just met her. Was only just learning who she was. And now they'd be on opposite sides of the world. We'll video call, Isla assured him. Every day if you want. I'll send photos and videos constantly. You won't miss everything. I'll miss her, Archer said. Miss seeing her in person. Miss bath time and story time and watching her figure out the world. But I understand. This is important for both of you. I'll deal with it. You could visit, Isla suggested. If you can get away. Singapore's only 12 hours by plane. You could come for long weekends. Spend time with her there. I'd like that, Archer said. I'll figure out the logistics. Make it work. The day before their departure, Archer came to say goodbye. He brought a stuffed elephant, Aurora's favorite animal. She grabbed it immediately, hugged it with the fierce love toddlers give their special things. Archer knelt to her level. I have to stay here while you and Mama go on an adventure. But I'll call you every day, and I'll come visit. And when you come back, I'll be right here waiting. Okay. Aurora didn't understand. She just babbled and showed him the elephant. Archer hugged her, held her longer than usual, memorized the weight of her, the smell of her baby shampoo, the way she patted his back with tiny hands. When he finally let go, his eyes were wet. He looked at Isla. Take care of her. Always, Isla promised. And Archer? Thank you. For showing up. For proving you meant what you said. Aurora deserves a father who tries. And you've been trying. I'll keep trying, Archer said. For the rest of my life. They left the next morning. Archer felt the absence immediately. His flat felt empty. His routines felt purposeless. He'd only been a father for 3 months. But those 3 months had changed everything. Changed what mattered. Changed what success meant. Changed who he wanted to be. Work continued. Meetings happened. Deals closed. But none of it felt important. Not the way Aurora's laugh felt important. Not the way seeing her learn something new felt important. He video called every evening. Singapore time morning. Aurora would be eating breakfast. She'd wave at the screen. Show him toys. Isla would narrate what they'd done that day. The museum work. The parks they'd discovered. The other children Aurora played with. Archer listened hungrily. Stored every detail. Lived vicariously through their experiences. 6 weeks into the separation, Archer flew to Singapore. Long weekend trip. Minimal work justification. He just needed to see his daughter. He arrived at Isla's temporary housing exhausted from travel. Aurora had grown. Not dramatically, but enough that he noticed. She was steadier on her feet. Using more words. She saw him and hesitated. Didn't quite remember. Then Isla said, "Look who's here. It's Daddy." And Aurora's face lit up. She toddled over. Arms raised. Wanting to be picked up. Archer lifted her and felt complete. This was what he'd been missing. This physical presence. This real connection. Video calls couldn't replicate the weight of her in his arms. Couldn't capture the way she tucked her head against his shoulder. Couldn't substitute for actually being there. He spent 3 days with them. Went to the museum. Explored Singapore. Took Aurora to gardens and aquariums. Let her fall asleep on his shoulder during long walks. Helped with bedtime routines. existed in their space without trying to control it. Isla watched him with Aurora, saw how he'd grown more confident, more natural, how he anticipated Aurora's needs better, how he'd become a real father instead of just a genetic contributor. On his last evening, after Aurora was asleep, Isla made tea. They sat on her small balcony. "You've changed," she observed. "In the 3 months since we started this. You're different." "I had to change," Archer said. "The person I was couldn't be what Aurora needed. So I became someone different. Someone better." "Do you resent it?" Isla asked. "The changes. The compromises. The way your life isn't entirely yours anymore." "No," Archer said honestly. "I resent the time I missed. The first 18 months. But the changes? The compromises? I'm grateful for them. They made me realize my old life was empty. I was successful but alone, achieving things no one cared about. Now I have purpose. Have someone who matters more than any deal or company. Aurora saved me from becoming someone I'd have hated." "She's good at that," Isla said softly. "Saving people. She saved me too. From becoming bitter about what you did. From staying stuck in anger. She gave me something to focus on besides hurt." They sat in comfortable silence. Singapore's skyline glittering below. Archer's flight left in the morning. 3 more months until Isla and Aurora returned to London. It felt endless, but also manageable now, because he'd proven to himself he could show up, could be consistent, could be the father Aurora deserved. Whatever it took, however long it took, he'd keep showing up. The remaining time in Singapore passed slowly. For both of them, Isla threw herself into the museum work, created connections that would lead to future opportunities, built her professional reputation, proved she could manage international projects while raising a toddler alone. It was exhausting but rewarding, and it gave her financial security she'd never had. The ability to save, to plan, to not live in constant fear of one emergency destroying everything. Archer visited twice more. Long weekends stolen from work. Each visit he seemed more settled, more confident in his role, more connected to Aurora. Isla watched their relationship deepen, watched Aurora start looking for him, asking about him when he wasn't there. Watched her daughter gain a father slowly but surely. When they finally returned to London, Archer was waiting at the airport. Aurora saw him immediately, shouted "Daddy" with pure joy, ran toward him with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of a toddler. He scooped her up, spun her around, and Isla felt something shift in her chest. Something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't anger anymore either. Just acceptance. This was their family now. Unconventional, built from broken pieces, but functional, real. Archer had proven himself, had shown up when it mattered, had become someone she could trust with their daughter. That was enough, more than enough. They settled into a new routine. Archer had Aurora 3 days a week, Tuesday and Wednesday evenings. All day Saturday, Isla used that time to work, to have adult conversations, to remember she was more than just a mother. The balance worked. Aurora thrived. She was confident and curious and loved by both parents. She didn't remember a time without her father, didn't know the complicated history, just knew that Daddy showed up, that Daddy read stories and gave baths and made her laugh, that she was safe and wanted and cherished. Isla watched Archer with their daughter and felt grateful, not for what happened, but for how he'd responded, for his willingness to change, to grow, to become someone worthy of Aurora's love. Months became a year became 2. Aurora grew, started preschool, made friends, developed her own personality. She was brilliant like both her parents, creative like Isla, driven like Archer. She asked questions constantly, wanted to understand everything. Both parents delighted in her, competed over who got to teach her new things. Archer taught her about technology and systems. Isla taught her about art and storytelling. Aurora absorbed it all with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been given every advantage. Not material advantages, emotional ones. 2 parents who showed up, who communicated, who put her needs first, who'd figured out how to co-parent effectively despite their complicated history. Isla and Archer developed something that almost resembled friendship. They talked easily now, not just about Aurora, about their work and their lives and their individual struggles. They supported each other through difficulties, celebrated each other's successes, built trust slowly through consistent action. Archer never pushed for romance, never suggested they try again. He understood that some doors close permanently, that you can't undo hurt just because you've changed. But they built something valuable. Partnership, respect, shared investment in raising a child they both loved. And sometimes, on the rare occasions when they were both at Isla's flat for Aurora's bedtime, they'd sit together after she was asleep and talk like old friends. Like people who'd been through something difficult and survived. On Aurora's third birthday, they threw a party together. Isla's flat filled with toddlers and parents and chaos. Archer showed up early to help set up. They worked side by side, blowing up balloons, setting out food, creating a celebration for their daughter. Aurora ran between them, showing them her new toys, making sure both parents were watching. This was her normal. Two parents who got along, who showed up for her, who loved her completely. She didn't know they'd almost never been this family. Didn't know about the silence and the abandonment and the court date. She just knew that Mama and Daddy were both here. And that was all that mattered. After the party, after guests left and Aurora crashed from sugar and excitement, Archer helped clean up. Isla washed dishes. He dried. Domestic and easy. Thank you, Isla said quietly. For showing up today? For showing up every day? Aurora is lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Archer replied. She gave me purpose. Both of you did. I built a life around achievement, around being the smartest and most successful. And none of it mattered. But this, being her father, watching her grow, this matters. This is what I'll remember when I'm old. Not the deals or the wealth. This. You've become a good father, Isla acknowledged. Better than I thought possible when you showed up at that court 2 years ago. I had to be, Archer said. Had to become someone worthy of her. Someone who didn't repeat my mistakes. Someone who showed up. They finished the dishes. Archer prepared to leave. Paused at the door. I never thanked you properly. For giving me a chance. For not shutting me out permanently. For letting me be her father despite how I treated you. That took courage. Generosity. I don't take it lightly. You earned it, Isla said. Through your actions. Through your consistency. Through proving you meant what you said. That's all I ever needed. Proof. Archer left. Drove home to his still empty flat. But the emptiness felt different now. Not lonely. Just quiet. Because he had Aurora. Had regular time with his daughter. Had a relationship he'd built through effort and presence. Had become the father he should have been from the beginning. The journey had taken longer than it should have. Had been harder than necessary. But he'd arrived. Finally. After years of chasing the wrong things and valuing the wrong metrics. He'd figured out what actually mattered. And he'd never forget again. Years continued passing. Aurora grew into a bright, confident child. She excelled at school. Made friends easily. Showed talent in both art and science. Both parents supported her interests. Attended every school event. Every performance. Every parent-teacher conference. They showed up separately but consistently. Aurora never questioned why her parents weren't together. This was just her family structure. And it worked. Worked because Archer had proven himself. Because Isla had given him a chance. Because they both prioritized Aurora above their own hurt and pride and complicated feelings. When Aurora was 7, she asked Archer about how he and her mother met. They were building with blocks in his flat. Saturday morning routine they'd established years ago. Mama said you met at a conference. That you talked about art and technology. Were you in love? Archer paused. Considered how to answer honestly without making it complicated. We were. For a while. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people make mistakes that hurt each other. And the relationship doesn't survive. But you survived. You're the best thing that came from us knowing each other. Do you wish you were still together? Aurora asked with the directness children bring to difficult questions. I wish I'd been a better partner to your mother, Archer said carefully. I wish I'd shown up when she needed me. I wish a lot of things. But I can't change the past. I can only be the best father possible now. Does that make sense? I think so, Aurora said. You made mistakes but you fixed them, right? I'm trying to, Archer confirmed. Every day. That's good, Aurora said. Then immediately changed topics the way children do. Can we get ice cream after this? Archer laughed. Sure. We can get ice cream. Simple moments. Normal conversations. The building blocks of a relationship he'd almost never had. Archer thought about the day in Paris when he'd planned to propose. The ring still in a box somewhere. The speech he'd memorized. The grand gesture that had been interrupted by reality. He'd thought that's what love required. Big romantic moments. Dramatic declarations. But real love was this. Saturday mornings, building with blocks. Ice cream runs. Showing up when it was boring and difficult and routine. Being someone Aurora could count on. That was what mattered. That was what he'd finally learned. If this journey of redemption and second chances has touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories about the real work of love and the courage it takes to rebuild what's broken. When Aurora turned 10, something shifted between Archer and Isla. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't a single moment of revelation. Just the slow realization that the walls Isla had built to protect herself had gradually eroded. That the man Archer had become over these years was someone she genuinely respected. Someone she enjoyed spending time with. Someone who had earned back her trust through thousands of consistent actions. They'd been co-parenting successfully for 8.5 years. Had navigated school choices and medical decisions, and the complex logistics of raising a child between two homes. Had built a friendship neither of them had expected. And somewhere along the way, without either of them acknowledging it, something more had begun to grow. It started with small changes. Archer staying for dinner after dropping Aurora off. Isla calling him just to talk, not just about their daughter. The three of them taking day trips together. Not as separate parents sharing custody, but as a family unit. Aurora noticed. Of course she noticed. She was perceptive and intelligent and knew her parents better than they knew themselves sometimes. She watched them laughing in the kitchen. Saw the way her father's hand lingered when passing her mother a cup of coffee. Noticed how her mother smiled differently when Archer was around. She didn't say anything. Just observed. Hoped. Waited. For Aurora's 10th birthday, they planned a special dinner. Just the three of them. Aurora's choice of restaurant. She picked an Italian place they all loved. Dressed up for the occasion in a new dress. Seemed unusually excited even for a birthday. At the restaurant, after they ordered, Aurora pulled something from her small purse. A folded piece of paper. She placed it on the table between her parents. I have a birthday wish, she announced solemnly. Anything. Archer said immediately, making Isla laugh. You should hear what it is before promising, Isla cautioned. Aurora unfolded the paper. It was a drawing. A house. 3 stick figures. A sun. Standard child's artwork except for the careful lettering at the bottom. My family. Together. Isla's breath caught. Archer went very still. Aurora looked between them with serious eyes. I know you're not together because Dad made mistakes a long time ago, she said with the directness they'd both grown accustomed to. But he fixed them. He shows up now. All the time. And I think you both still love each other. You just don't say it. Aurora, Isla began gently. Relationships are complicated. I know, Aurora interrupted. But so is everything worth doing. That's what Dad always says. And I think you're worth it. Both of you. Together. Archer looked at Isla across the table. At the woman who'd given him a second chance he hadn't deserved. Who'd raised their daughter with strength and grace. Who'd taught him what actually mattered. Your daughter is very wise, he said softly. And very direct. She gets that from you. Isla replied, a small smile playing at her lips. No. Archer shook his head. The wisdom is all you. The directness might be me. Aurora watched this exchange with growing impatience. So, will you try? For my birthday. Try what exactly? Isla asked. Being together. Properly. Not just for me. For you. Archer reached across the table. Took Isla's hand. I never stopped loving your mother, he said to Aurora, but his eyes stayed on Isla. Not for a single day. Even when I didn't deserve her. Even when I thought I'd lost her forever. I just learned to be grateful for what we had. For the family we built. For the second chance to be in both your lives. Isla's eyes filled with tears. I spent years protecting myself from you, she said quietly. Building walls. Keeping distance. Making sure you could never hurt me again. But somewhere along the way, I stopped needing those walls. Because you became someone I could trust. Someone who showed up. Not just for Aurora. For me too. Is that a yes? Aurora asked hopefully. Isla laughed through her tears. It's a maybe. A strong maybe. We need to talk about this as adults maybe. I'll take it. Aurora declared triumphantly. Best birthday present ever. That conversation opened a door neither Archer nor Isla had allowed themselves to consider. They started dating. Cautiously. Intentionally. Not rushing. Not assuming. Building something new rather than trying to recapture what they'd had before. They went to dinners without Aurora. talked about things beyond parenting, remembered why they'd fallen for each other in the first place. The connection was still there. The understanding, the way they saw each other completely. But now it was deeper, tempered by experience and forgiveness and the shared love for their daughter. 6 months into this careful exploration, Archer took Isla to Paris, to the restaurant where they'd had their first proper date years ago. The restaurant he'd booked for a proposal that never happened. He didn't tell her the significance, didn't want to burden the moment with too much history. But as they finished dinner, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. "I've been carrying this for a very long time," he said, placing it on the table between them. "Not this exact box. The original is somewhere in storage. But the intention behind it, the hope." Isla looked at the box, didn't open it. "How long?" "Since the day I flew to Paris. The day I got your message about the court date. I was coming to find you, to apologize, to ask for another chance, to propose." "You were going to propose?" Isla's voice was barely audible. "Yes," Archer confirmed. "I'd planned everything. The restaurant, the speech, the grand gesture. I thought that's what was needed to fix what I'd broken. But I was wrong. What was needed was 8 years of showing up, of being consistent, of earning back trust I'd shattered, of becoming someone worthy of you and Aurora. And now," Isla asked, still not touching the box, "now I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to build a future. With me. The three of us together, the way Aurora drew in her picture. The way I think we were always meant to be, if I hadn't been too blind to see what mattered." Isla finally reached for the box, opened it slowly. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant, not ostentatious. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I remembered what you value," Archer said. "Not the grand gestures, not the expense, the meaning, the thought behind it." Isla looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes. 8 years ago, I would have said no. Would have been too afraid to trust you again. Too hurt to believe you'd changed. And now?" Archer asked, his voice steady but his eyes revealing vulnerability she rarely saw. "Now I've watched you become the man I always knew you could be. The father Aurora deserves. The partner who shows up not just when it's easy or convenient, but when it's hard. When it matters." She took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll marry you." Archer's face transformed with joy. He took the ring from the box, slid it onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady. "I promise you won't regret this. I'll spend every day making sure of it." "I know," Isla said simply. And she did know. Because he'd already proven it. Not with words or promises or grand gestures in Paris, but with years of consistent action, of showing up, of prioritizing what mattered, of becoming someone worthy of the second chance she'd given him. When they told Aurora, her reaction was everything they'd hoped for. Pure joy, jumping up and down, hugging them both so tightly it almost hurt. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I knew you still loved each other. When's the wedding? Can I be a bridesmaid? Will we all live together? In which house?" They laughed at her enthusiasm, her rapid-fire questions, her absolute certainty that this was how things should be. "We haven't figured out all the details yet," Isla explained. "But yes, you'll definitely be in the wedding. And yes, we'll all live together. We just need to decide where." "My house is bigger," Archer offered. "But your flat feels more like home. We could look for something new, something that's ours together." "I like that," Isla said. "A fresh start. Something we choose together." They decided on a small wedding. Intimate. Just close friends and family. Held in a garden with flowers Aurora helped select. She walked down the aisle before her mother, scattering petals with serious concentration. Isla followed in a simple dress that made Archer's breath catch when he saw her. They wrote their own vows. Promises not of perfection, but of persistence. Of showing up. Of choosing each other every day. Of building something stronger because they knew how easily it could be broken. "I promise to never again take for granted what matters most," Archer vowed. "To remember that success isn't measured in achievements or acquisitions, but in the love we share and the family we've built. I promise to be the man you deserve, the man Aurora taught me to be. I promise to trust the man you've become," Isla replied. "To remember that people can change when they choose to, when they do the work, when they show up consistently. I promise to build our future without letting the past define us. To choose forgiveness over fear. To believe in the family we've created together." Aurora stood beside them, beaming with pride, holding the rings on a small pillow, watching her parents promise each other forever. In her 10-year-old mind, this was always how the story was supposed to end. The long journey just made it more meaningful, more real. She understood, in the way children sometimes grasp truths adults overcomplicate, that her parents' love was stronger now precisely because it had been tested, because it had required work and forgiveness and growth, because they'd chosen it deliberately rather than falling into it accidentally. They moved into a new home a month after the wedding, a house with a garden, with room for Aurora to grow, with space for Isla's art and Archer's technology. A place that belonged to all of them equally. Not his, not hers, theirs. They established new routines, family dinners, weekend adventures, movie nights where Aurora always got to choose the film. They weren't perfect. They disagreed, had arguments, navigated the complex logistics of blending their separate lives into one shared existence. But the foundation was solid, built on years of co-parenting, of communication, of putting Aurora's needs first, of learning how to work together even when it was difficult. Archer continued running his company, but with different priorities. He was home for dinner most nights, attended Aurora's school events without exception, scheduled meetings around family commitments rather than the other way around. His colleagues adjusted. Some understood. Others didn't. He stopped caring about the opinions of people who measured success only in profit margins and market share. He had found a different metric. One that counted moments rather than money, memories rather than milestones. The way Aurora's face lit up when he walked through the door. The way Isla looked at him across a crowded room. The quiet contentment of Sunday mornings with both of them still sleeping while he made breakfast. This was success. This was achievement. This was what mattered. Isla's career flourished. With Archer's support and Aurora's growing independence, she took on more ambitious projects, curated major exhibitions, traveled occasionally for work, but always came home to her family, found the balance she'd never thought possible between professional fulfillment and personal happiness. She watched Archer with their daughter, saw the bond they'd built, the trust, the inside jokes, the absolute certainty Aurora had that her father would always show up, would always be there when she needed him. And Isla felt grateful, not for how their story began, but for how they'd written the middle chapters. For the ending they were creating together. On their first anniversary, they returned to Paris, to the restaurant where Archer had proposed, where he'd planned to propose years earlier. They talked about the journey, about the court date that had changed everything, about the daughter who had saved them both in different ways. "Do you ever regret not telling me sooner?" Archer asked. "About Aurora? About the pregnancy?" Isla considered the question carefully. "I used to think I made the right choice, that I was protecting her, protecting myself. But now I wonder what we missed. Those first 18 months. The time we could have had together from the beginning. I wouldn't change it," Archer said, surprising her. "Not because those months weren't precious. They were. I'll always regret missing them. But because I needed to learn the lesson. Needed to understand what I'd lost. Needed to become someone worthy of you both. If you told me immediately, I might not have changed. Might have tried to balance fatherhood with the same priorities that made me ghost you in the first place. Might have been present, but not really there. The way I found out, the shock of it, the grief of what I'd missed, that changed me fundamentally. Made me reevaluate everything. Made me understand what actually mattered. When did you become so wise?" Isla asked with a small smile. "When I became a father," Archer replied simply. "When I realized I was responsible for teaching Aurora what matters. What love looks like. What showing up means. I couldn't teach her those things without learning them myself. If this story of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances has touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." As Aurora grew into her teenage years, their family strengthened. They weathered the storms of adolescence together. The mood swings. The questions about identity. The pushing of boundaries. They presented a united front when needed. Gave Aurora space when appropriate. Showed her through their marriage what healthy partnership looked like. What love looked like when it was chosen daily rather than assumed. What forgiveness looked like when it was earned through consistent action rather than mere words. On Aurora's 16th birthday, Archer gave her 2 gifts. The first was practical. Driving lessons with a professional instructor because, as he admitted, He didn't have the patience to teach her himself. The second was more meaningful. A journal. Inside, he'd written the story of how he and Isla had found each other again. How Aurora had been the catalyst for his transformation. How becoming her father had saved him from a life of hollow achievement and empty success. I want you to know where you came from, he wrote in the final pages. Not just the genetics. Not just the family tree. But the journey. The mistakes. The growth. The forgiveness. The love that created you and the love that brought us back together. You are the best of both of us. The reason I learned what matters. The gift I almost missed receiving. Whatever path you choose in life, whatever mistakes you make, whatever successes you achieve, remember that showing up is what counts. Being present. Being consistent. Being someone others can count on. That's the legacy I want to leave you. Not wealth or status or achievement. Just the understanding that love, when it's real, is worth the work it requires. Aurora read the journal with tears streaming down her face. Hugged her father with the fierce love that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. I'm proud of you, she said, the words a gift more precious than anything he could have given her. Of both of you. For finding your way back to each other. For showing me what love really means. That night, after Aurora had gone to celebrate with friends, Archer and Isla sat in their garden. The spring evening was cool but pleasant. They'd been married for 6 years. Together as a family for nearly 14. The journey from that sterile family court to this peaceful garden had been long. Complicated. Beautiful in its imperfection. Do you ever think about how differently things could have gone? Isla asked, her head resting on Archer's shoulder. If you hadn't shown up at that court date? If I'd managed to get the passport without contacting you? All the time, Archer admitted. I came so close to losing everything that matters. To never knowing Aurora. To never finding my way back to you. To living a life that looked successful but was empty at its core. I'm glad you showed up, Isla said simply. So am I, Archer replied, kissing the top of her head. It's the best decision I ever made. The beginning of all the good that followed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Their journey hadn't been easy, hadn't been straightforward, had required work and forgiveness and growth that neither had anticipated. But it had led them here, to this garden, this home, this family they'd built together, to a love stronger for having been lost and found again, for having been tested and proven resilient, for having been chosen deliberately, day after day, year after year. Archer Hayes had once flown to Paris with a ring and a speech and a grand gesture planned. Had thought that's what love required. What forgiveness could be won with. He'd been wrong. Love wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was showing up, being present, doing the work, proving through consistent action that you were someone who could be counted on. Someone who understood what mattered. Someone worthy of the second chance you'd been given. And in the end, that's exactly what he'd become. Not through the proposal he'd planned in Paris, but through the thousands of moments that followed that unexpected court date. The bath times and bedtime stories. The school plays and soccer games. The difficult conversations and shared celebrations. The daily choice to be present. To prioritize what mattered. To never again take for granted the gift he'd almost lost. That was the real love story. Not how they met, or how they fell apart, but how they found their way back. How they rebuilt what had been broken. How they created something stronger from the pieces. How they showed their daughter what love looked like when it was chosen deliberately. When it was earned through effort and consistency. When it was built on the foundation of showing up, day after day, for the people who mattered most. Thank you for joining us on this journey of redemption and second chances. If Archer and Isla's story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need a reminder that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. To show up for those who matter. To earn back what you've lost through consistent action and genuine change.